Good morning, church. It's good to be with you this morning. It's good to be back. It's been just about a year, and you haven't aged a bit since that time. It was just about 1 year ago. It was last February when I was here with the good folks from St. Martin's and St. Luke's, Harlem, as we were celebrating our 95th anniversary at that time. And by the grace of God, we have held on one more year to celebrate 96. And some of us are here this morning as well, so I want to thank them also for being here. But I'm here, as you heard also, with a different hat this time. That of the chaplain right next door at Cathedral School, or trying my best to be the chaplain there. And I'm so glad that the schedule worked out when I could be here on this Sunday when the Cathedral choristers are singing. So I want to be sure to give them a special shout out on this morning. And their presence reminds me that oftentimes when we gather as a community, a school for a chapel of some sort, we begin with that psalm from Psalm 118, verse 24, that says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." And so I am rejoicing on this morning and glad in this. And because, we say that because it is a way of saying that each day, this day and each day, is a gift from God. It's a gift from God, and we want to acknowledge it as such and be thankful for the gift of yet another day. Be thankful for the gift of life that we have been given and not take that for granted. And I'm also grateful that I'm here on a morning when there are catechumens who are taking another step on the journey of faith. Today is the second Sunday of Lent, as we know, but it's also the last Sunday in February, which means we're still in the midst of Black History Month. And I want to lift that up on this morning as well. I will rejoice and be glad in that also, because certainly for me, Black History Month is also important, and it's something that we need to highlight. We know by this time there is no way to tell anything of what we might call the American story or American history without speaking of the particular history and the particular story of Black Americans. So much of who we are is tied up and connected with that story of Black Americans. And that includes the Christian story in this nation as well. There have been ups and plenty of downs, yet, as Dr. Maya Angelou might say, still we rise. Still we rise. With challenges like anyone else, yes, but still we rise. And I think we've managed to rise more often than not because of our collective sense of faith, a faith that has undergirded, that has nourished, that has strengthened a people for over 400 years on these shores. And I think of it sometimes as an unbelievable faith in many ways. Unbelievable faith when it comes to Christianity in particular, because as we also know that Christianity played a central role in Africans being captured and forcibly taken from their homeland and brought here or scattered through the West Indies and Brazil as well. And even in the church, by leaders of the church, including this very church. Our first presiding bishop was also a part of the enslavement of others at one point. That's part of the history that we must remember and that must be told. Yet we also know that's not the end of the story. There's another part of the story which may have some of those who came before rolling in their graves right now, I don't know. But there's another part of the story which notes that we are now coming into the last few months of another presiding bishop's term, and that is the episcopate of presiding Bishop Michael Curry, the first African-American presiding bishop in the Episcopal Church. That doesn't mean that everything before it is made right or that we've even got everything all together right now, but what it might mean or what it might demonstrate, I pray, is the power of what's possible when we follow the way of Jesus, instead of following the worst of our own instincts. The way of Jesus, as we have come to understand, is always the way of love. Only the way of love can open up the possibility of moving from being a church whose presiding bishop was one who was part of the enslavement of others, to being a church whose presiding bishop now is the descendant of those who have been enslaved. Not to mention the other roughly 20 or so living black bishops in the Episcopal Church today. From those difficult and tragic beginnings, new possibilities and new realities have now emerged. A new world has been created, not a perfect world, certainly, but a world that was still so hard to imagine during the time of that first presiding bishop. I maintain that this work is nothing less than the Spirit of Jesus, which is the Spirit of love, active and alive in the church and in the world. You see, if we let it, it works on us. Maybe not as swiftly as we would hope, but over time, love gives us new eyes for new possibilities. Eyes to see the humanity in those who have previously been treated inhumanely, or those who have treated others inhumanely. Eyes to see and respect, therefore, the dignity of every human person, as our baptismal covenant implores us. Eyes to see the ways that we are constantly being asked to go into greater, not lesser, relationship with the people and the whole world around us. And the truth is, we all need it. We all need this power of love, God's love, to open us up, to give us a suppleness of heart that allows us to become vulnerable enough to offer love, not knowing if we will receive it in return, offering it as freely as we can, even to those we are most afraid to love, because that's just what love does. It moves us beyond the limits of our own prejudices and presuppositions. In 1793, a yellow fever epidemic struck Philadelphia, which at that time was the nation's capital. And by the time it was all over, it took about 5,000 lives, which is roughly 10% of the city's population at that time. Another 20,000 people fled, including one President George Washington and his cabinet. But among those who stayed behind were those who made up the largest community of free blacks in the nation at that time. And two of their most prominent leaders were a man named Richard Allen, who would go on to become the founder of what is now the AME, or African Methodist Episcopal Church, and another man by the name of Absalom Jones, who became the first black priest in this Episcopal Church, and one on whose shoulders I do my best to stand on. But it was in the midst of this epidemic that Richard Allen and Absalom Jones convinced this community of people to not just care about and for themselves, but to take up the mission to care for others who were becoming sick and dying from yellow fever, even at great risk to themselves. They convinced this community to take up a cross and to follow Jesus, even in a yellow fever. And you know what? They did it. They cared for others who were getting sick and dying, even at risk to themselves. Many of these free blacks, including Richard Allen, became sick, and some even died. Yet as a community, they kept on caring about and caring for others. They kept on caring for those who may not have cared for them if the shoe had been on the other foot. They did it out of a love of God and a love of neighbor, a love for a wider humanity. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. I don't recount this story, especially the part about the free blacks who died, as a way of glorifying suffering. I don't believe in glorifying suffering for its own sake, or suffering as a kind of spiritual exhibitionism, you might say. The point that Jesus is making here is not to go out and make yourself suffer or kill yourself to prove that you are a good person or prove to him that you love him. There is nothing to prove because we cannot make him love us more than he already does. The depths of his love for us, the depths of his solidarity with all of us, with all of humanity, was revealed on the cross that he bore, not the one that he asks us to take up. No, Jesus gives us an invitation. If any want to become my followers, an invitation to a particular way of life that doesn't go looking for things to make us suffer, but a way of life that does go looking for those who are suffering and on the margins. A way of life that does not ask us to deny our own self-worth and value and the self-worth and value of others, but a way of life that calls us, rather than deny, to dignify our own self-worth and value and the self-worth and value of others. A way of life that calls us out of the perpetual cycles of violence and domination that are playing out all around us each and every day, and into a life that follows the way of the one who refused to participate and add to the cycle of violence and domination, but instead he chose to face it head on with only the weapon of love. But a love so strong that it shines light even in the places where love has been utterly forsaken. Church, as we settle into this season of Lent, the questions that Jesus raises here are undeniable. Do we want to become his followers, or perhaps continue to be his followers? What does it mean to us to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him? Are we willing to trust God enough to lose our lives in the hopes of finding ourselves? Or will the Peter in us appear, that we will rebuke Jesus at the thought of following him in this way of living? With all that we face as individuals, as a nation, as a global society, what might it mean to follow the way of Jesus? I can't even try to answer for anyone other than myself. But I do know that Lent is meant to give us this kind of space and room for deep reflection. What does it mean for us to truly follow Jesus? What does it mean for us to truly know love and be a people of love? You may recall in 2017, the civil rights icon, Congressman John Lewis, died that year. The nation was in a really bad place, though it seems we are not in a much better place even today. Congressman Lewis knew that his time was growing short, so he wrote an essay shortly before his death, an essay that was released right after his death in major newspapers and online. But the essay, or should I say love letter, was urging America and Americans to all live up to our best selves. He wrote in this essay at one point, "You must also study and learn the lessons of history, because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements, stretching across the globe, because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. He wrote this at the very end of his life. It was clear, at least then, what it meant for him to pick up his cross and deny himself in the following of Jesus one last time, even unto death. We are not called to be Jesus, or even John Lewis for that matter, but we are called to discern for ourselves where and how the Spirit of love is calling us to commit ourselves ever more deeply to the way of Jesus, ever more deeply to be people of love, as we continue to write this story, the human story found in God. In the name of God, amen.